What is up, guys? This is Tcg Sam here, and today I'm coming at you guys with a meta tier list prediction for the new May/June 2022 format post ban list. So if you guys like this type of content, be sure to let me know by leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing. But one more thing before we begin, remember this is my opinion and my opinion only. I also only included what I believed would be the top 25 most relevant or played decks. So if you don't see like a certain deck in there, just know that like I can't possibly cover them all in one video. But yeah, with that being said, let's just hop straight into it. The very first deck I'm going to be talking about is ABC Therion. So with the new Therion stuff, the ABCs get a huge boost because Regulus does give it a lot of potential extra protection from hand traps, and it also gives them like an Omni Negate in their end board, which is incredibly good. It's essentially like a in archetype Brave Engine of sorts. Before ABCs, like they really had the biggest issue was like if you really don't see like Union Hanger, it's pretty difficult to start most of your plays. So adding like the Therions does give it a few extra options, and it has a lot of potential to put up big boards. I think personally only time will tell how good it'll really be. So for now, I'm gonna put it in tier 2. I could be completely wrong about this. I just personally feel like these types of decks are like they require a very skilled pilot for it to be very good. So in the hands of the right pilot, it can definitely be tier 1, but I think otherwise in the hands of an average player, it's probably going to be around the tier 2 level. So next up, Despia slash branded Despia. Obviously, I think this is without a doubt going to be one of the best decks in the format, if not the best deck. It's the one that everyone's expecting as well. It's just super powerful for getting access to all of your fusion plays with branded fusion, and like the deck keeps just getting better and better because people keep innovating with it. So now the most recent innovation at the time of recording this video is like the Allure build with like Mercurier and stuff that just gives it a lot of extra consistency and power. And I just think that in the hands of a right pilot as well, once again, like this deck can honestly make some absolutely insane plays. It can break boards, it can make boards. I think for that reason it's definitely tier 1, but even like if you aren't like the best player in the room with this deck is still very good just because a single branded fusion does so much for your deck. Next up, I'm going to be talking about Drytron. So they recently got Ben 10 back to 2. It's very interesting that the Konami decided to give Drytron some extra help. The second Ben 10 is actually pretty good. Just because it gives them an extra thing to tribute that actually does something. So now the deck will be a little more consistent. I think even though like they got the Ben 10 back, they did lose out on like the easy access to Scythe and to like pop it. So like they used to play DPE and they were the DPE Scythe deck last format, but now this format without Anaconda, it's gonna be pretty difficult in order to actually Scythe lock, to my knowledge. So I think right now it's gonna kind of be more of like a Herald of Perfection like turbo, and while that's like okay, I still don't think that's gonna be like anything game changing. I feel like that losing a DPE in return for Ben 10 doesn't really make the deck better. In fact, I think it takes it down a notch. So I'm gonna put it in like the bottom half of like tier 2. I personally just don't think this deck is gonna be super great. But yeah, anyways, the next deck I'm going to be talking about is Adignister. So Adignister is probably one of the decks that most people haven't like played against. It was like meta for a brief time, like tier 1 for a brief time, like a few formats ago. But now I actually believe that with the way the format is going to shape out, it actually has a lot of potential this format. Just because of a card like Arrival Cyber's Adignister, it's incredibly difficult for a lot of decks to out if it's 4K or over. So if you consider something like branded Despia, pretty much the only way they're getting over an unaffected monster that's like 4K or bigger is specifically with like Ad Libitum giving Guardian Chimera 800 attack. But like that's just super niche, and it's probably just never gonna happen once you have your established board. So especially in a lot of matchups, it's just an auto win. I guess something like Wanderies as well. They have like Underworld Goddess, but like that's incredibly hard for them to make. So a lot of the time, like, Arrival Cyrus Adignister could just honestly be an auto win. The deck also has access to a lot of good cyber staples. So now with Decotalker Heat Soul, it has like a very solid plan B if it gets like Nibiru'd or something. So I think for that reason, I'm gonna actually put it like in the upper / middle half of tier 2. I personally believe a lot in this deck. I definitely think the fact that it just has such an easy win button that a lot of decks can out. And even like decks that can out it. Like if you think about it, most of the time it's only going to be like something like Access Kotak or a Boral Sword, but you always have access to Dan Mari in the graveyard to just negate that single effect, and then your opponent just won't ever be able to out it again because they'll just lose that monster next turn. So definitely something you got to watch out for. Of course, the deck like does kind of get worse if people start respecting it and playing cards like Kaijus in the side deck. But until then, this deck definitely, I think, has a lot of potential. So the next card I'm going to be talking about is, or the next deck, sorry, is Phantom Knight. So Phantom Knight hasn't really been doing too well lately. Like at the beginning of the format, people considered it like the best Scythe deck. But now that Scythe is gone, or sorry, DPE is gone, it's going to be a lot harder for them to Scythe lock. They're still able to do it with a card like Breaksword and Rusty and Fogblade in the graveyard. They can break Breaksword back, use Rusty effect to pop their Scythe, but it becomes a lot harder to do it consistently. But even then, even when you consider how it could play the Brave Engine, how it could play the Scythe stuff, it still wasn't even that great last format. I think this format's not going to be like much different. Losing DPE makes it so like now it's kind of like a really okay mid-range deck, has a lot of recursion from the graveyard and can play well out of it. It can set up like okay boards with like multiple Fog Blades and stuff, but like losing out on DPE, like it just takes a lot from their end board. Now they're ending on something like IP Masquerena, which is okay, but isn't as good as nearly as good as DPE. I feel like it's going to be in the bottom half of tier 2. It's an okay deck, like I said, but I don't think it'll be that great. Next up is Pendulum, so like all variants of like combo Pendulums, so something like Pendulum Magicians or something is probably going to be the most common one. With Beyond the Pendulum, I feel like Beyond the Pendulum is pretty good. Of course, it's not on the level of Electromite, but Beyond the Pendulum does give Pendulums a huge boost. I think just more people will want to play this deck just because of this card, so I think it's something you got to watch out for. Pendulum's great because it's still one of the few decks that can still do the Scythe lock with a card like Halka Vibrax and the TG Wonder Magician, because they can very easily make Halka Vibrax. They put a bunch of monsters on the board turn 1. The biggest problem I see with this deck is that there's a lot of side deck hate that can be used against this deck, especially now that the way they're Scythe locking is with Halka Vibrax. Something like Dark Ruler actually does get rid of the Scythe lock because Halk is only during the main phase. It's also important to note that like Pendulum hate, like Anti-Spell Fragrance and Dimensional Mirror, are also very good against other decks in the format, so people are going to have a lot of that in their side decks. So I feel like Pendulum, like while it has a lot of potential, just because like it has good rank 4 access, it can Scythe lock, and it has a lot of combo potential, I just feel like unfortunately, like with all the hate that's going around, like all the possible hate that could be sided against this deck, I feel like it's probably just going to be like bottom of tier 1, top of tier 2. I could be underestimating it though. I don't have too much experience with this deck, but these are just my initial thoughts on it. Next up is Sword Soul. So Sword Soul lost the Auroradon combo, which isn't honestly going to like hurt the deck that much in my opinion. The Auroradon combo was nice. It did allow Sword Soul to have a much higher ceiling, but now you can play it more as like a control mid-range style deck, especially with the Second Desires. They get an extra consistency boost. But Sword Soul, like, it's just a very solid deck. It's kind of like that, like anchor deck that will always be like decent or good in like the uncertain times. I definitely think it's like a tier 1 deck for sure. It's definitely not broken by any means. I think it's a very fair deck, but it's also a fair deck that does this thing very consistently. Boards like Chi-Chao Blackout is like, it's not really anything to scoff at, considering like they can get that off of like just a single card. So yeah, Sword Soul, because of its consistency and just because of its like versatility, you can play a bunch of hand traps in it. You have access to like 10E stuff, which gives you a lot of toolbox effects. So I think for that reason, Sword Soul, I definitely say it's a solid tier 1 contender. Next up is Earth Machine. So Earth Machine or Earth Toolbox, like last format it was okay. Like it's always just been on like a rogue tier deck. Now the only reason I'm considering it again is because of the Therions. You can play the Machine King Regulus in here because all of your guys are machines. It does give Earth Machine a very solid option going first, just because before, from my experience playing against it, they tended not to do too much. They're kind of like a very good grind deck. Like they can grind pretty well, they could gain a lot of advantage off of a single card, but their end boards usually weren't too scary. Like at the most, it was kind of just like a Machina Citadel, which is okay, but I just really don't think that'd be enough. They're a great toolbox deck because they have access to like the rank 10s going second, play a lot of hand traps, but I think with the Therions, like it gives them a little bit of an extra boost. I'm gonna put them at the bottom of tier 2. I think the deck with the Therions, like I said, just does give it a lot of help, but I really don't think this deck is like, personally from my experience playing against it and like seeing what the deck does, I think it's just a tier 2 deck. I don't think it's super great. Next up is Dino. So Dino is kind of like the deck that's like, oh, it's talked about every format, but it's just never like that broken. Like it's always like a decent deck, and I think nothing has really changed here. Like Dinos, obviously Conductor's still nothing like to be scoffed at. It's still an incredibly good card, but I just feel like Dinos, still with the one Miscellaneous does make it so their plays are a bit hindered until Miscellaneous comes back to like 2 or 3. I feel like Dino's just always gonna be like a middle of the pack tier 2 deck. Like it'll always be like decent, just because one, it doesn't lose to the Scythe, which is pretty important. It's less so important now, but like it doesn't lose to Scythe. It can play second very, very well, but also going first, especially if you're playing it with some like combo things like Scrap Raptor and stuff, it makes it so Dinos are like incredibly good. Alright, moving on to the next deck. The next deck is like Shaddoll. So this is all variants of Shaddoll, aside from like the Invoke variants. So this is like Shaddoll Branded, Shaddoll Dogmatica, stuff like that. Shaddoll, like Winda's still like a super impressive card. From personal experience playing that card, like it's still an incredibly powerful floodgate that like a lot of people can't deal with. It's kind of like, it's almost like a Scythe in a way. Like you summon it and your opponent just can't special for the rest of the turn. It's kind of like they're getting Scythe locked, unless they have specifically like droplets or something to out it. It also has a very interesting Despia matchup. It can play cards like Super Poly, which is incredibly good against Despia. So it can kind of tango with the Despia stuff. It's definitely not a deck to be underestimated. Like I said, Winda's incredibly good. They just have a lot of good cards going second. So like Shaddoll Fusion, incredibly powerful. Super Poly, like I mentioned, not only against Despia, but also against like other decks in the meta as well. Like Sword Soul, like they put up light monsters, you can fuse a Super Poly away with their monsters. It's just honestly really, really good. Next up, we're going to be talking about Cyber Dragon. So Cyber Dragon is interesting. I guess technically you can play it with the Therions, although I feel like Cyber Dragon still will just always be like a going second deck in my opinion. Going first, like you very specifically have to draw like the right things, like the cards, to make it so you can actually make a board going first. So you need like machine duplication specifically or something, or like if you're playing like a fusion, like one of the fusion spells like Fusion Destiny or whatever, you need to specifically see it. Now with Verte Anaconda Band, it loses access to like a very easy turn 1 fusion. So like before, you can play cards like Red Eyes Fusion, you can play Fusion Destiny, it gives you some going first place. But now if you don't draw like machine duplication, it makes it pretty difficult for you to put up respectable first turn boards. Maybe it has some potential with Therion, but I feel like personally it'll just be a rogue deck. Like it's just always okay. Like it can go second, which is like probably its biggest strength, is that it doesn't need to win the die roll to win. But I feel like those going second decks is just, they need a lot of help. They need to draw like the right combination of board breaking cards as well as engine in order to be able to play. Next up is Heroes. So with Hero lives to 3, like that's just an extra bit of consistency. Like it's nice, and it's one of the like, well, I guess it's like the only deck that can really make DPE now. We know how powerful a card like DPE is. DP is incredibly good. Of course, Dark Law is also very, very powerful against most of the decks right now, aside from like Wanderies. Setting up like Dark Law or DP is like pretty good. My biggest gripe with this deck has always been the fact that like it hard loses to a card like Nibiru. You really just don't have a good way to play around it unless you have like Cross-Out Destiny or something. And personally, I feel like Nibiru is gonna start slowly edging back into the meta. It's not gonna be like in everyone's main deck, but I feel like more people are gonna start to consider it now. Just because now your opponent's not gonna be like, oh, if I get nibbed, I'm just gonna make it a 30 and just go DPE pass. But now, I feel like people are going to be considering the card more, so it's going to be harder to play a deck like Heroes. I still think though, like this deck is really good just because of how powerful cards like DP and Dark Law are. I'm personally going to like put it like at the very top of Rogue, bottom of tier 2, but I feel like also it's also kind of like Cyber Dragon in the sense that like it's a lot better going second because it has access to like Malicious Bane and stuff. But it's a little better than Cyber Dragon in that like it can actually go first and put up like a threat like Dark Claw. Next up is Eldritch. So Eldritch is just always like a pretty decent deck. I definitely say it's like bottom of tier 1. It's like definitely a tier 1 deck. It's probably worse than all the other decks above it, but like it's definitely a tier 1 deck. You can play all those powerful floodgates, so things like Goes In, Rivalry. These cards are very good against a deck like Brandon Despia. They can also play the branded stuff now, so that gives them a very strong like turn 1 board. So like they can set their traps, they can set up a Mirror Jade, and that just becomes a big problem for a lot of decks to out. Like the traps are already hard enough for most decks to out, but now that they have access to like the branded fusion, it gives them a very powerful turn 1 play as well. So I definitely feel like you need to respect this deck, this format. I feel like most people are going to be playing this deck. Like if they don't know what they're gonna play, just because it's the easiest to pilot, you just slap in some floodgates and just go from there. It's always gonna be kind of a threat you gotta like be aware of, so I would recommend like still sliding in your back removal in this format. Next up, we're gonna be talking about Wanderies. Wanderies is just one of those decks that's always like a threat you gotta worry about, just because it can play super huge blowout cards. Things like Dimension Shifter, Harpy's Featherstorm, like these are cards that like have little to no counterplay, and if they resolve against you, like you pretty much just lose that game. Wanderies also has an incredibly good grind game, so good grind against the grindy decks, but it can also just floodgate out like those combo decks as well. So it makes it very hard for a lot of decks to actually deal with, especially like Barrier Statue, Empen. These are floodgates that like a lot of decks have trouble outing. Your opponent also can Rise you on their turn, so like it's honestly just a great, very, very powerful deck. It's definitely a tier 1 deck. In my opinion, definitely something you gotta watch out for. Next up is Virtual World. So Virtual World traded one thing for another. What I mean by that is before the Virtual World, players were playing a card like Auroradon in their deck with the punk stuff, just because the Auroradon combo got them access to like Lily and helped them set up like negations like Baron, and that raised the ceiling and consistency of the deck a lot. But now that we lose that, we gain a Desires back instead, which is gonna kind of seem insignificant, you might think, but like in a deck like Virtual World, any like extra card is super beneficial. That essentially gives Virtual World an extra starter and increases the consistency of the deck, which was always like one of the biggest issues that the deck had. I feel like Virtual World always gonna be a decent pick as well. Like I would say it's a solid tier 2 deck. It can definitely compete with a lot of the decks out there right now. And you also just gotta be aware Virtual Worlds can like they always have a card for like every situation. It seems they have a lot of toolbox effects to get rid of stuff in the graveyard, get rid of stuff in the field. They can Zoo Swipe the board going first. A card like Shen-Shen's still pretty annoying for a lot of decks out, although Shen-Shen like isn't that great anymore, just because like most of the top decks don't like auto lose to it like something like Prank Kids would. For that reason, I'm gonna put it like in the middle of tier 2. It's a solid deck for sure. Next up is the Punk Therion deck. So this is kind of mostly just based off of that one card. Like this deck thrives on being able to do like their 1-card combo that like sets up calamities on your opponent's turn. This could possibly be like the new Scythe Lock, but I think the problem with that is the calamities being summoned also like being summoned off of like a card like Hal makes it more vulnerable to like things like Imperm or Droplets or Dark Ruler no more. So I think this is a combo deck that like while has a lot of potential, just because like a single card in this deck can do a lot. It can like mill 9, it can set up a bunch of negates on its own. I feel like it really needs like more refining, and someone needs to like optimize the combo lines in order for it to be truly competitive. So for that reason, I'll put it like in the middle of tier 2. It is more theories and speculation than anything, because I personally haven't seen too much of the deck. But from my knowledge and experience, I would say decks like these probably like just gonna be tier 2. They need to be in the hands of the right player in order for it to do a lot. Next up is going to be DDD. So DDD has been falling out of favor a bit lately, but I feel like DDD is one of those combo decks that like is actually pretty scary, because they just keep playing like through interruptions. Like your opponent like just seems to always be able to play through negates no matter what. They can also play a few hand traps of their own, so like it's not like they can't go second either. But like I always just feel like nothing really makes it stand out from like these other like mid-range, like mid-tier combo decks like the Punk Therions or ABC Therion or something. I feel like it's just a tier 2 deck. That might be overvaluing it too. Like I know like some people consider this deck to be rogue, but I personally respect the deck. I feel like the deck has a lot of potential combo lines and has the potential to be good. Next up is Invoke Dogmatica, or like Invoke branded. Invoke, just pretty much any Invoke variant. This deck, like Sword Soul, is also just always like a deck that'll always be there. It'll always be decent and playable in every format, but it'll never be like the best deck in the format most of the time. Same case here. I definitely would say it's like a very solid tier 2 deck, like top of tier 2, bottom of tier 1 type of deck. And it's just consistent. It has access to, like, if you're playing the Dogmatica stuff, you can play something like Winda. You can play the branded stuff in this deck as well, just giving it 3 extra starters in case your Alistair gets stopped in any way. And of course, the recursion that Alistair gives you just makes it so very difficult for a lot of decks to deal with. Next up is Live Twin / Evil Twin. This is, like, of course, before like the Splight level 2 stuff comes out. I think this deck is just always just gonna be a rogue deck. Like it's definitely like a cool deck in that like it has 1-card combos, and that 1-card combo gets you a lot of advantage. You can like draw 2 cards, you can pop a card. That's pretty good, but I just feel like it just doesn't do enough. Like that's the only thing that it does. You can play like a bunch of hand traps and stuff, but then it just becomes RNG if you're trying to draw like the right cards. So for that reason, I'm gonna put it in the Rogue Deer deck. Next up is Tri-Brigade. So losing the branded like Anaconda is actually kind of huge, because now the branded Tri-Brigade deck just isn't a thing. Like you can't activate the branded fusion if you're doing a Tri-Brigade stuff, so that's kind of a big issue. Like now that Anaconda's gone, like essentially now you're forced to play like pure Tri-Brigade, or you're forced to play something like Lunalight Tri-Brigade, or like Bird Up. Those are definitely great Tri-Brigade variants. Tri-Brigade's always been like a solid deck, always will be a solid deck. I think I'll definitely put it like at the top of tier 2. And you definitely go toe-to-toe with a lot of other decks right now. It has a lot of space for cards like hand traps. And like I said, there's a lot of options as well. You can play more of a control-based or like mid-range type of Tri-Brigade with like the rescue cats and stuff, or you can go the more combo route with like Lunalights and the Leerless stuff. That just adds a lot because now you have access to like the rank 4 package with the Lunalight stuff, or you have easy access to Zeus with the Leerless stuff. So definitely a lot of things a lot of options for you to choose from if you're deciding to play the Tri-Brigade deck. Next up is Plunder Patrol, or Brave Plunder Patrol, because that's the way most people are playing. Plunder Patrol has always been an like interesting deck, just because a lot of people don't know what it does, and that helps the Plunder Patrol player, like an experienced Plunder Patrol player, just outplay their opponent super well. I know you can say that about most rogue decks, but like Plunder Patrol is just one of those decks. Like it's actually a really like decent deck with all like the different options it has. It has all of the extra deck monsters that like it can banish monsters on the field, it can banish spells and traps. It has a monster negator. And like it just has it can generate a lot of advantage with all the cards that they're drawing and searching. But I feel like it's just personally a rogue deck. Next up is Skystriker. Skystriker is actually interesting. I would say Skystriker is like one of the few decks you can still argue to play a card like DPE in, just because you can play something like Prosperity. Prosperity is one of those, like, so also I should have mentioned with the Invoke stuff, you could also play a card like Prosperity. Helps you dig for those power spells like Fusion Destiny and stuff. Striker just has a lot of like toolbox options. It can go second. It can play cards like Mystic Mine, unfortunately. But yeah, I would say it's like a very solid tier 2 deck. It's like near the top of tier 2 in my opinion. Definitely like able to compete with a lot of decks right now. It's just always like a solid deck. It's just, this format in my opinion just has a lot of decks that are just solid. Like they're pretty good, but I feel like none of them are really like only a few of them like really stand out above the rest. Next up is Dragon Link. Dragon Link just got the new Boral End Dragon, so that's pretty cool because it gives them an extra layer to their end board. It gives them a new boss monster they can link into if they're locked under Rocket Tracer's effect. Dragon Link's also great because you have the option to play like Albaz too off of Erratic Steel. I don't know if that's optimal, but just having that option means it's more of a very flexible deck. Going first, it can put up very good boards. Going second is a lot of extenders and hand traps to possibly play through boards. I personally feel like it's definitely like a cut above the rest in terms of like consistency and power. So I definitely put it like at the bottom of tier 1. It's definitely a pretty decent deck in my opinion. Next up is Sun Avalon Therion. So the Sun Avalon deck is very cool just because a single normal monster gets you to like your full end board of like a bounce plus a Dark Ruler no more. But adding in like Therions now gives you an extra like negation, gives you more consistency. And this is actually a deck that I personally feel like could be really good. Has a lot of ways to start that 1-card combo, like a little more so than like something like ABC, because ABC will have like Hanger and Terraforming. But Sun Avalon, you can play like Unexpected Die, you can play Painful Decision, you can play the 3 normal monsters themselves. You have a lot more weight. You have Lone Fire Blossom as well to get to your combo. The Sun Avalon deck, like definitely something to like watch out for in my opinion. I would personally put it like at the bottom of tier 2 above Rogue, just because of how much potential the Therion stuff can give it, and how much like potential their end board can possibly have. Like their end board now, at the very minimum, is still like a Dark Ruler no more in the form of a trap, plus like a Bengal Lancer, which allows them to bounce a card, I believe. So definitely watch out for this deck. It's a very very strong 1-card combo. Finally, I'm going to be talking about Salamangreat. So Salamangreat just got Circle to 3. That does add a bit of consistency to it. They also have access to Deco Tucker Heat Soul now, which is actually pretty significant because before Salamangreats were never ending on a monster that did anything. They always relied on their hand traps and their actual trap cards in order for them to disrupt their opponent. But now a card like Heat Soul gives them a good monster to link into that actually does something on your opponent's turn. It gives you a draw on your turn, and gives you the potential to draw into a hand trap on your opponent's turn. Of course, Heat Soul is fire, so you can still use it after Mirage Dahlia's effect. And like the Ignister deck, it also has access to the Cyber's generic Cyber's pool. So for that reason, I feel like Salamangreat's definitely like a solid like mid tier 2 deck. Adding a lot of consistency with the extra circle, and like I said, just you can play a bunch of hand traps, and just always going to be like very versatile. It can play out of the graveyard and such. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the format. Initially, I'll just say this once again, this is my opinion and my opinion only. I could be completely wrong about like these decks. And once again, if you don't see your favorite deck, just know I can't possibly cover all of them in a single video. So do keep that in mind when leaving your comments. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of this tier list in the description below. Do you agree, disagree? I want to see your opinions. But with that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Do stay tuned for a bunch of deck profiles coming up of a few of these decks, and more content like this to come. But yeah, thank you guys so much once again for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.